Warm greetings to one and all present here. It's been after a long that we are meeting on this platform for one more interesting lecture. I, Dr. Shikha Dhiman, Assistant Professor, Department of Laws, Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar, will be enlightening you all on the topic Methods of Sampling. Let's start with an introduction. Legal research means to search out something new in the dimensions of law or legal field which no one yet has found. Every legal research involves some broader steps to be followed in order to reach at some concrete solution. These steps are to be performed in an appropriate sequence, else the researcher will end up in misleading research. The first and foremost step is the identification of research problem and proceeding further with reviewing of literature, and which in turn will help in formulating the hypothesis. Now, once the hypothesis is formulated, then comes the research design, which itself includes the sampling design. For the purpose of testing the hypothesis, one needs some information which can be collected by various modes. It can be collected either through census or through sample method. Now, let us understand what do we mean by census and sample. Once the researcher demarcates the area of research, then either census or sample is to be taken. Census means when the whole area of study is taken and it is called the universe of the study, whereas when the information is collected from the universe of study, it is known as the census technique. On the other hand, sample is just the small portion or specimen of whole of the universe which represents the general attributes of the entire population. The technique of gathering data through the sample is termed as sampling. Sampling is the act of retrieving information from small group of population which is assumed to be the representative of the entire population. Sampling is generally resorted to because in socio-legal research it becomes quite tedious to conduct census method to gain the information. Sampling is a statistical technique where the researchers take a predetermined number of observations from a larger population. The sampling or selection of the sample used for the study is always intended for the sample to be sufficiently representative to know its characteristics as well as to analyze the information. So, it can be well articulated that sampling cuts back when the population is too large and all its members cannot be surveyed. It usually aims to obtain information from a smaller group representing the entire population. Now, let us talk over the need for sampling. Sampling is indispensable technique for some behavioral researches. The research work cannot be undertaken without the use of sampling. The study of the total population is not possible and it is also impracticable. The practical limitations are like cost, time, money and many other factors which are usually operative in the situation and stand as a barrier in the way of studying the total population. The concept of sampling has been introduced with a view to making the research findings economical as well as accurate. Now, let us understand the concept of sampling. In order to understand sampling, one must know the basic concepts of sampling without which sampling cannot be undertaken. They are discussed as under. Number 1, population. It is the entire universe or the whole area from where the sample is to be collected. Number 2, sampling units. These are the set of those elements which are to be considered for selection. Next, third, sampling frame. It is the actual list from where the sample is to be taken. Scientifically arranging the required sample is known as sampling frame. Next, sampling design. It refers to those set of rules which are to be followed while conducting the sample, that is either probability sampling or non-probability sampling. Sample size. It is the number of elements in the sample. Sampling error. As sample is just the representative of entire population, so there is a degree of error to be expected from the sample, and that is nothing but known as sampling error. Now, there are various steps that is involved in the sampling design. Let's discuss each of them. There are various steps to be undertaken for deciding the sample in any type of research. These steps are discussed as under. First, define the research objectives. Before the researcher divides the sample design process, the foremost step is to define the research objectives. The aim of the researcher should be crystal clear so that the entire sampling design remains very easy and effective. Whether it is to study the consumer behavior, analyze the market trends, or explore the impact of specific intervention, or defining the research objectives, always provides a clear roadmap for entire sampling process. Second step, identify the target population. After defining the research objectives, identification of target population is the crucial step. This target population will represent the group of individuals or such elements that the researcher aims to generalize the findings. It is significant to clarify, define and understand the demographics, characteristics and parameters of the target population before proceeding ahead with the sampling method. Identifying the target population also allows the researchers to ensure that the sample individuals represent the broader group accurately, increasing the external validity of the study. Third step, determine the sample size. Determining the appropriate sample size is a critical factor in sampling design. A sample size that is too small may not accurately represent the target population, while a sample size that is too large may result in unnecessary cost and resources. Determining the sample size requires considering various factors such as desired level of precision, variability within the population and of course the available resources. Fourth step, select the sampling technique. Various sampling techniques exist, each catering to different research scenarios. The choice of sampling technique depends on the nature of research, available resources and the level of precision required. Common sampling techniques include simple random sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling and systematic sampling. Understanding the different sampling technique allows the researcher to choose the most appropriate method for this specific research, ensuring the representative and reliable results. Fifth step, implement the sampling strategy. Once the sampling technique is selected, it is the time to implement the sampling strategy. This involves identifying the potential sampling units and selecting the actual sample elements from the target population. Researchers must avoid any sort of biasness and ensure randomness in the selection process so as to maintain the integrity of research findings. Implementing the sampling strategy meticulously enables the researchers to minimize potential bias and increase the chance of obtaining accurate results that can be generalized to larger population. Sixth step, collect the data from sample. With the sample selected, data collection becomes the next crucial step. Researchers can use various methods such as surveys, interviews, observation, experiments, etc. to collect the necessary data. It is essential to follow the research design and to consider the data quality measures to ensure reliability and validity of the collected information. Collecting the data from the sample involves establishing effective communication channels, designing appropriate data collection instruments, and of course, capturing the information accurately to minimize the measurement errors. Seventh step, analyze and interpret the findings. Once the data is collected, it is the time to analyze and interpret the findings. This involves applying statistical techniques, conducting hypothesis testing, and drawing meaningful conclusions. Researchers should ensure they have the necessary analytical skills or collaborate with experts in data analysis to derive some accurate and insightful results. Analyzing and interpreting the findings allow the researchers to draw meaningful conclusions and make informed decisions based on the evidence through the different research process. Now, let us talk over the different techniques of sampling. Sample can be collected through various modes. The technique of collecting the sample entirely depends upon the type of information which is required by the researcher. There are two broad methods of sampling. First is probability sampling and number two is non-probability sampling. The difference is that in probability sampling there is a random selection of elements, and in non-probability sampling there is non-random selection of elements. Next, in probability sampling, choice of sample group is left to the researcher, whereas in non-probability sampling the choice of sample group is made by using deliberate process. In probability sampling, there is equal probability of being chosen, whereas in other there is unequal probability of being chosen. In probability sampling, it can be more expensive and time consuming, and on the other side, non-probability sampling, it is more convenient and less costly. Probability sampling is generally used in conclusive research, and the other one, non-probability sampling, is used in exploratory research. Probability sampling is the method of sampling which is less prone to bias, whereas the non-probability sampling is the method of sampling which includes greater risk of bias. Probability sampling is not useful when small number of elements is to be chosen. On the other side, non-probability sampling may be preferred when small number of elements is to be chosen. Now, there are different types of probability sampling, like it includes random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling and multi-stage sampling. Whereas in non-probability sampling, it includes quota sampling, purposive sampling, convenience sampling, incidental sampling and snowball sampling. Now, this probability sampling, it has further different types. Let us discuss the first one, that is simple random sampling. In this type of sampling, units have equal chance of being selected. The units are randomly selected from the group. Use of table of random numbers, a computer random number generator or a mechanical device to select a sample. Sometimes we can also use a lottery method, or it can also be used by picking a name from a hat, and many more methods. With such random picking of units, there will be equal chance of selection to all the units. N is the number of units in the sampling frame and small n is the number of units in the sample, and the formula comes out to be, the fraction is f is equals to small n over capital N. For example, you want to know about how people feel about the safety in their locality. You want to have the sample of just 50 people in the locality, and there lives 2000 people in the locality. Then the sampling fraction will be 50 divided by 2000, and it comes out to be 2.5. Now, we have several options to choose the sample. We can either go for ball machine method, or randomly picking from a ball, or picking it from a hat, etc. Another example, you want to select the students from the class for just some competition in the department. Just write the roll numbers on the small piece of a paper in a different slips and then put all the slips in one hat. Now randomly pick up the number of slips, the number of students that you require for the competition. Next type is systematic sampling. In this, the researcher identifies the total population and then determine the sample size. The next step is to divide the sample number by total population so as to get the kth number. For example, if the total population of an area is 1000 and we need the sample of 50, so your k will be 1000 divided by 50 and it comes out to be 20. The researcher will not randomly select the starting point, that is some number between 1 to 20, and after that the next number of the sample will be chosen by adding 20 to the first selected number and so on. Third type is cluster sampling. This type of sampling is also known as sub-sampling or area random sampling. If the total area happens to be large, then it is feasible to divide the area into smaller non-overlapping areas called clusters and then randomly select few of these smaller areas. All the clusters are assumed to be homogeneous, but there exists heterogeneity within the clusters. It can be rightly said that homogeneity among the clusters but heterogeneity within the cluster. For example, for the purpose of selecting 10% sample from all the primary school children in Chandigarh, the investigator may list up all the primary schools instead of all the primary school children and select randomly or systematically a 10% sample of all the schools. Although the unit of the inquiry may be individual child, yet the unit of sampling is a school or a cluster of children. Fourth type, stratified sampling. In this method, the population is divided into few groups so that they can be compared to each other. A popular method to increase the precision of the simple random sampling is to stratify the main population into a number of subpopulation, each of which is homogeneous with respect to one or more characteristics, and then to select randomly the required number of cases from each subpopulation. Since each stratum is more homogeneous than the total population, we get more precise estimated from each stratum. It can be rightly said that heterogeneity among stratas but homogeneity within stratum. For example, if we wish to collect information regarding income expenditure of male population strata on the basis of special profession pursued, we shall get the classes of service people, businessmen, shopkeepers, workers, etc. And from these, we shall select random units for study of income expenditure statistics. Next, fifth type is multi-stage sampling. It refers to sampling plans where the sampling is carried out in stages, using smaller and smaller sampling units at each stage. When we combine the various sampling methods, it can be called as multi-stage sampling technique. Multi-stage sampling refers to sampling plans where the sampling is carried out in stages using smaller and smaller sampling units at each stage. For example, in order to conduct the face-to-face interview of New York residents, we will first form various clusters as the first stage of the process. Then we will sample township or census tracts throughout the state. In order to measure everyone in the cluster, we might set up the stratified sampling process within the cluster to get the persons interviewed. This will be then second stage of the process, and ultimately interviewing the few random samples by random sampling technique, we will get out the desired result. So, in this case we have 3 to 4 stages in sampling process, and we use both stratified and simple sampling. Now come to the next broad category, that was non-probability sampling. Now it is of further different types. First is convenience sampling. It is also known as accidental sampling or haphazard sampling. It is the non-probability sampling wherein the units are selected by the researcher owing to its convenience and proximity. In this, the units are selected on the basis of their availability or because of their easy access or ease of volunteering. For example, you want to study the effects of coffee on study habits of college students in Punjab. Now, to test the whole population, you need all current colleges and the whole lot of time. A convenience sample would be a large group of students from your local college or colleges. It is considered that they are not different from other college students. Now, what are the advantages of this sampling? Faster analysis, quick formulation of theories, less time, less cost and expenditure involved. Now, what are the disadvantages? Sample may not be the representative of the entire population. Researcher cannot make generalizations about the total population. There is high risk of biasness. Misleading information can be there by the respondents. Next is judgment sampling. Under this, units to be observed are selected on the basis of researcher's professional judgment or experience. Researcher exerts some efforts in selecting the units which is to be studied. There are some advantages of it. It is possible to use judgmental sampling if the researcher knows a reliable professional or authority that he thinks is capable of assembling a representative sample. Number 2, researcher might not get the correct or accurate information. There are some disadvantages also. Number 1, when it comes to the sampling process, it is usually biased since no randomization was used in obtaining the sample. Number 2, it is also worth noting that the members of population did not have the equal chances of being selected, and ultimately the consequence of this is the misrepresentation of the entire population, which will then limit the generalizations of the result of study. Another type is the quota sampling. This method of sampling is a combination of both judgment and stratified sampling. In this type, samples of prefixed sizes are taken from each stratum of the universe using judgment sampling method. Example, quota sampling is usually used in the municipal surveys. What are the advantages? It is an improvement over the judgment sampling. It is an easy sampling technique. It is most commonly used in social surveys. Now, what are the disadvantages? It is not a representative sampling. It is not free from error. It has more influence of social factors. Another type, purposive sampling. The purposive sampling is known to be the representative of the total population, or it is known that it will produce well matched groups. The basic idea is to pick out the sample in a relation to some criteria which are considered important for a particular study. This method is appropriate when the study places special emphasis upon the control of certain specific variables. There are some advantages, that is, it better controls the significant variables. The sample group's data can be easily matched, and third, homogeneity of subjects used in the sample. Then what are the disadvantages? The researcher must have the knowledge of population, otherwise sampling becomes tedious. Number 2, reliability of criterion is questionable. And number 3, inability to utilize inferential parametric statistics. Last, that is snowball or chain or referral sampling. It is a non-probability sampling method where new units are recruited by other units to form the part of the sample. Snowball sampling can be useful to conduct the research about the people with specific traits who might otherwise be difficult to identify. For example, people with a rare disease. Also known as chain sampling or network sampling, Snowball sampling begins with one or more study participants. It then continues on the basis of referrals from those participants. This process continues until you reach the desired sample or a saturation point. Now, there are some advantages of snowball sampling. Snowball sampling helps you research populations that you would not be able to access otherwise. Members of stigmatized groups, example people experiencing homelessness, may hesitate to participate in a research study due to fear or exposure. Snowball sampling helps in this situation as participants refer others whom they know and trust to the researcher. Number 2, since snowball sampling involves individuals recruiting the other individuals, it is a low cost and easy to recruit a sample in this way. Third, unlike probability sampling, where you draw your sample following specific rules and some form of random selection, snowball sampling is always flexible. All you need is to identify someone who is willing to participate and introduce you to the others. Now, there are some disadvantages as well. As the sample is not chosen through random selection, it is not the representative of the population being studied. This means that you cannot make statistical inferences about the entire population, and there is high chance of research bias. The researcher has little or no control over the sampling process and relies mainly on the referrals from already identified participants. Since the people refer others whom they know and share traits with, this sampling method has a high potential of sampling bias. Another disadvantage, relying on referrals may lead to difficulty reaching your sample. People may not want to cooperate with you, hesitate to reveal their identities, or mistrust the researchers in general. Now, these were the different types, and now we are just concluding the topic. There is no doubt that sampling method is very important tool of research in the field of law. Sampling techniques are helpful to researchers in one way or the other. Moreover, in a society like ours, we cannot leave public opinion at the back. Our country follows democratic structure, and hence public opinion about the law, its impact on the society and its adaptability in the present scenario is essentially to be observed. Sampling method is therefore the best suitable method for a country with a heterogenic population. With all its limitations, sampling method does furnish a challenge to those who may have or develop an interest in the quantitative approach to study and research in the field of law. Sampling methods have been ignored in legal research due to lack of awareness and information that has proved a biggest hindrance in using these methods. Therefore, the need of the hour is to educate legal luminaries, academicians, law teachers, researchers about the nature, use and scope of sampling methods in the legal research, so that the branch of law can also benefit from techniques. Thank you everyone for your valuable time and attention. I also appreciate this opportunity to speak and share my views with you today. Thank you once again. Take care. God bless you all.